Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Matthews. I'm Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. We're pleased to welcome you to Day 3 of the AI and Human Rights Forum. Today, we have an assorted list of experts to talk about multiple really fascinating issues. But first, before we process to the next panel, I would like to just thank our sponsors and supporters, most notably the Government of Canada, including Global Affairs Canada, for being a partner for this event, the Quebec government, the Ministère des Relations Internationales et les Francophonies, as well as the Embassy of the Netherlands to Canada. And we're really proud also to have this going under the patronage of the Canadian Commission to UNESCO. So those are the partners that have made this event possible. We're really thankful for their support. And now I say, let's just go into the discussion. No need for me to talk anymore. So I would like to pass on. The next panel is on AI and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'd like to pass it to the moderator and introduce Béatrice Vaugrante, who's Director of Movement Building at the Amnesty International Secretariat. Béatrice?
Thank you very much, Carl, for the introductions, and I'm really thrilled to be facilitating this panel because we have wonderful people, and I will ask them to briefly introduce themselves, but definitely good people with very good different angles and the insight about the views about the AI and machine learning and technology and the impact on the SDGs. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about that. I will directly go into the subject because I really like to give the maximum of time to the four wonderful panelists, and then maybe hope for some as well questions from the participants. So we are covering here the questions of AI and the 17 SDGs and 169 targets. We all praised that about the existence and as a global engagement from all governments to improve dignity and living conditions for us all on Earth. And we all pray that it will be implemented at all national levels, that progress will be measured, accountability will not be a vain hope. So the researchers, we have seen that in different articles and research reports that have found that AI can enable the accomplishment of 134 targets across all the goals, but as well, it may also inhibit 59 targets. So reading the article as well, when you can see, and the report, you can see there is a thread and a common thread about potential as well, negative impact on deepening inequalities. So what can we do? So my question to the four panelists, and as a start, and they can give us their thoughts in short 5 minutes each. But when it comes to advancing the UN goals, what is your perspective on good versus harm? What worries you and what excites you? We'll start with Maria. I think you're muted, Maria.
That's the story of our lives in this lockdown. You know, you're muted. Hello, everyone. Maria Axente from PwC UK, based in London. In my position as a responsible AI and AI for Good lead at PwC, I was quite fortunate to be at the beginning of, or the start of the AI for Good revolution that started to peak somewhere around 2017, when a group of enthusiastic experts from around the world gather around the ITU in Geneva with the purpose of launching a new initiative called AI for Good. They started with a summit that in 2017 gathered about less than 500 people in their offices in Geneva. And since then, we've seen an absolute explosion of interest, participations, and debates around the topic around the world. And because my role is very much connected with how do we understand the right values that need to be incorporated in an AI solution, beyond the technology into the processes and people that operate around and with this technology, we started paying attention to how can we translate those best practices and standards that drive the development and use of AI in for-profit into social causes. And this is where we've seen a lot of potential that could be could accelerate the solving some of the problems under the SDG. And I'll start with a few considerations about the role of the private companies in promoting the SDGs and how can they support best the realization of those ambitious, global, and yet very, very big goals that the United Nations have set up. First and foremost is being able to support the development of AI in the same way we do it in for-profit. So if we deploy the best rules, the best methodology, the best people in making sure that whenever we consider an AI solution to solve some of the problems, that should be done in according not just with a well-stated problem, but also taking into account possible benefits, unintended consequences that could be both positive and negative. And when we start the design and the development with this in mind, benefits and risk, it's much easier to define design and governance requirements that will address the both maximizing benefits and minimizing risk. And while we do this consistently more in private space, I think we are now in a position to leverage some of those best practices and apply it in the social context. Realistically speaking, is the only way for us to achieve sustainability and quality when it comes of those solutions, because we are talking about such big problems that require multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approach. Is really important to have the same professionalism and thoroughness that we apply in the private sector. The second important conversation trend that happened at the level of private company is the growing interest in the ESG inside private companies. If traditionally ESG's environmental, sustainable, social, or governance topic, depending on how you explain the acronym, will be owned and will be sit under corporate social responsibility functional area within the companies. The last few years have accelerated the shift from of those topics from somewhere aside issues within the overall activity of one organization into the core of this. And we hear through our clients more and more interest on aligning the profit and the vision of the organization with a purpose that covers much more than achieving some financial targets, but also considering environmental, social, and targets besides the financial one. And this trend of considering the ESG topics more widely into the main corporate organizational strategy will see the core KPIs of one organization being transformed and changed. And we are hoping for a better alignment of those KPIs to the overall SDGs. And again, to the examples we have with the work of our clients through one of our business units that focuses very much on sustainability and climate change, we can see this interest growing. So this is a little bit beyond technology, a little bit beyond AI, but the reality is that when AI has the potential to solve some of those problems, it's still a little bit further away to be able to make such a profound impact. And probably the best way to judge the ability to AI to deliver on this potential is to look how much or how little AI has done for the current pandemic. But lastly, I think, which is probably one of the most interesting dynamics in the private company, is the internal activism of the employees. We've seen more and more from tech companies all the way to different corporations around the world, how employees are holding not only their employees, their employer accountable for the activities they run, but also we've seen those initiatives, grassroots initiatives, pushing for better alignment of the corporate dynamics with the ESG, for a complete overhaul of how technology is being designed and used in those companies to have ethics at the core of decision making and action. And it's exciting to see how those grassroots act as an agents of change. So what remains to be done is to have more commitment from the C-suite, from those executives, to top up this grassroots initiatives, to be able to really harness the potential of people with this goodwill into transforming the organization, not only to consider ESG, but also with that start aligning technologies like AI into helping solve those goals. Thank you very much. I'll pass it to you, Béatrice. Looking forward for the questions.
Yes, thank you, Maya. It's very interesting, and I'm very glad that you mentioned the activism from the employees as well. I'm sure they can be part of the agents of change and the pressure. Thank you, and good to see that ESG is beginning to come into the core activities of companies. Valentine, it's your turn now. Your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Béatrice. Bonjour, hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here with you. I always find these conferences, when I can't see the people or meet you in person, I find it difficult, but I'm nevertheless very happy to be here talking about this important topic. Given we have 5 minutes, I'd like to give a little bit of context perhaps to the hopes and fears I have about AI. 4 years ago, I founded an organization, nonprofit organization called AI Impact Alliance, which is an independent nonprofit organization aimed at facilitating the development and governance of ethical and responsible AI, democratic governance of AI. In that process, I founded a conference that's called AI on a Social Mission. The reason why I decided to organize a new conference on AI is I had noticed that there were very few women in conferences. There was a certain demographic that was highly represented in AI conferences with a very business-oriented goal. And I was extremely excited about the uses of AI for social purposes, for SDG purposes. My training is I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a member of the Quebec Bar Association. I'm a trained mediator. I'm also a visual artist, digital artist, and more recently have been recognized by the Canada Art Council as inter-arts curator. So not a category of curation that's necessarily very known, but is that link between law and art. So a lot of the work that I do is in that field. So going back to the history behind AI and social mission, I wanted to make sure that more nonprofit organizations, more civil society organizations, more social entrepreneurs would be able to learn about the interesting potential of that AI presented. Because those organizations are by definition the ones that are striving for SDGs to protect human rights, to advance social change, systemic change. Yet those were not the organizations and the people that I was seeing in most AI conferences. AI Social Mission welcomed way over 50% of women, and it's all 3 editions so far. So we're aiming at our 4th edition this year. I also put on stage right from the start, from the first year, the arts as having an important role in transparency in the ethics of AI. That is, being able to explain the processes behind automated decisions. So on our stage, we had high-level AI researchers, world-renowned researchers such as Professor Yasho Bengio, but we also, who supported the conference and the organization and still does to this day. But we also had artists who traveled the world doing theater, interrogating the cultural differences in the uses of Siri, for example, engaging citizens on critical questions on ethics around AI. So that was the premise behind what I started. And since then, I've continued to do a lot of work in digital literacy, civic engagement around critical issues. And one of the things I noticed also was that the funding was not going towards civil society organizations and nonprofit organizations in AI. If they were nonprofit organizations registered as such, they generally were lobby organizations representing the tech sector. I would really like to, I think, and we can move on to that maybe to the next question, but I just wanted to show a graph very quickly. And because I can't share my screen, I actually printed it. So I hope everybody can actually see this. Oh, this is hilarious. I have a green screen. Okay, the brick wall that you can all see is funding for the for-profit sector by the Canadian government in AI. This is a little graph I made based on research that was led by Ana Brandusescu, and I'll put the link in the chat after so everybody can have a look. And the little tiny blue circle is funding, and that's actually, we don't know if it's actually $0 or $1 million, but the for-profits is close to $800 million. In the non-for-profit funding, AI funding, in Canada, DST is actually a technology lobby organization. It's 152 million out of the 174 million. Academia receives 140 million. Referring to a quote that I've adapted from some Nobel Prize winners, the type of funding that we put in AI will determine the scope of advantage that AI can bring to society. So it's extremely important to pay attention to who is being funded, because these organizations not only are by definition the ones that are striving to achieve sustainable development goals, but an average of 7 to 8 out of 10 of the staff of the people working in those organizations are women. One of the problems we have with AI, no matter how much scope of greatness it can bring to society, has very few women. It is suffering from a serious gender crisis. Mila here in Montreal offers various amounts and grants to encourage the participation of women in AI research, but there still is nonetheless under 10% women who work as researchers. Facebook, Google, all have similar statistics where there's under 20% women working in AI. So I remember this one question that was asked to me during conference one: how do we bring more women to AI? I said, we don't bring more women to AI. We bring AI to where women are. And we need to fund where women are so that they can learn about AI applications and determine how they want to see it developed and governed. I'm going to stop now and we can talk a little bit more about the impact of COVID on gender bias and gender gap later, and I have a fun little announcement to make at that point.
Great, Valentine, and it's really good and important to hear about the importance of arts and definitely the question of funding, because this is a key question about where is the money and where should it go. And your graph was very, very much telling. Général Dallaire, c'est votre tour. Thanks, we are eager to hear your views as well about that question. Please, to you.
Right, and I am the senior fellow at the Montreal Institute of Genocide Studies and also a retired senator. And I'm looking very specifically at the goal and what it's supposed to do. Goal 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, and of course the AI dimension of that. And there is no sustainable development unless there's an atmosphere of security, and yet we have seen that we are still facing enormous conflict, insecurity, weak institutions, and limited access to justice, which makes it very difficult to bring forward sustainable development. And we also see the massive abuses of human rights that are ongoing. And though tools are available, like responsibility to protect, that we also see self-interest and the lack of risk-taking by the political elites to want to intervene in a proactive way to prevent many of these things. Now, my background and why I'm coming to you with this is that in Rwanda, the very unsophisticated RTLM radio station ultimately became the instrument that was not only part of the genesis of the genocide, but also sustained it daily, hourly, and as such was a primary instrument in the continuum of the genocide, and the International Criminal Court recognized it as such. That is real basic stuff. And so in 1999, I ran the reform of the Canadian Officer Corps. We had futurists come to us because we wanted to know what would be the tools to be used in decision making, what sort of ethical frameworks, what sort of moral references that we would have to institute in the ethos of the Officer Corps who are leading and to be running the possible use of weapon systems. What would we have to inculcate in them in order for them to be able to master the scenario? And the futurists told us two things, which were in fact, three things. The two most significant. One is that we will be entering the era of the man-machine interface, actually physical interfacing, which will enhance the man capability or the human capability, and that in itself had some very positive assets as we created exoskeletons and things of this nature in combat scenarios and protection scenarios. The other side of it, which was very troubling, is that our method of decision making, in order to handle the information and the instruments that are being made available to us, and AI is in the core of the future instruments, let alone weapon systems that are out there, communication systems, intelligence gathering, and so on, is that we would not be able to handle the decision-making processes with all that information because our method of deductive reasoning is too slow and unable to handle it, which means is that even within the premise of ultimately the command and the control of all these systems, we will have to integrate and find a way that the AI is in fact giving us the right information and consistent with our norms, our ethical references, and our moral references that we will be able to apply, let alone the rules of engagement. The third thing the futurists told us is that the rank system in the military and other places would not be in existence, and that nearly threw them out, but I'll leave that for another story. But what this does bring to us is that we were trying to look at what would be the tools needed for those who are going to be maneuvering with this capability in the year 2020 and beyond, and would be taking the decisions in that regard. And it became very, very evident that as we moved away from smart bombs and precision munitions and so on, into the whole realm of the robotic applications, the autonomous systems, and the like, is that we were entering a whole new, not only legal, but a new ethical framework of how, in fact, we can ensure that these systems are used for the prevention of conflict and the establishment of atmosphere of security, and not, in fact, used by either non-state actors through terrorism and the like, or even by rogue states that will, in fact, massively abuse the human rights through misinformation, through actually particularly targeting individuals, gathering information, and using it against them. We are in a real demanding era of not only having weapon systems that can actually function in near automated fashion with very limited human interfacing, as well as instruments that can target human beings and select and, in fact, establish an atmosphere that may seem to be secure, but on the contrary, may be exceptionally oppressive and far beyond what our sort of verbal classical way of looking at conflict and frictions in our societies. And so we're on a very steep learning curve in trying to look at those parameters, because our greatest weakness in all that is that most of this is still being done by private civilian industry with very, very limited controls and access to extraordinary resources that are, yes, in a number of cases, sustained by the military-industrial complex. Thank you.
Amazing question you put forward, Mr. Dallaire, really about definitely the impact and the information of the public of these key questions of security. Thank you very much for sharing. Sherif, this is your turn now. We are eager to hear your views as well, please.
Merci, Béatrice, and thank you very much, everyone. It's great to be on the panel today. So my name is Sherif. I maybe as way of background, I worked in human rights for a long time. I was with Amnesty International, had set up, co-founded AmnestyTech, so part of Amnesty working on the intersection of technology and human rights, and among other things at Amnesty. And then I moved to the private sector. So I've been working in the sort of the AI and human rights SDG space since 2015 or so, kind of looking at impacts, potential applications, all of that. I moved on to Element AI, Canadian company, AI company working on AI for good, and then setting up an AI for climate practice. And then now I've set up my own company that is an AI company that's focusing on climate change solutions, particularly in manufacturing. Just a small caveat, small thing here is that although it's working on climate change, I mean, in my view, climate change is the biggest human rights issue there is, and there has been for a very long time. So maybe just kind of the two questions that Béatrice had put to us. What sort of excites me and what worries me? As I think what excites me is the potential of artificial intelligence to enable us to do things that we couldn't do before. And it's really about better understanding everything around us, the world, the environment, anything that has data in it. We're talking about manufacturing processes, transportation, weather system, climate systems, understanding the SDGs and monitoring them, because that is where AI is incredibly powerful. It's about really looking at huge amounts of data, huge kind of interconnected data streams and different things that interact together, and bringing meaning and understanding to that in ways that we can't really without it. I have to say what worries me maybe is people actually, and it's in a way it's. AI is a tool, it's a technology, and how we use it is what makes it good or bad. How we make the decisions, people and institutions, companies, governments, nonprofits, anybody makes a decision of how they use it is what's going to predominantly determine the outcome. Of course, we want things. It's important that AI models and algorithms are well designed, that the data is clean and it's good quality data. But at the end of the day, if people decide to use something for bad, it doesn't matter if it's a really advanced artificial intelligence or a missile that's dumb, or some computer virus that has machine learning in it or doesn't have machine learning in it. That's not what's going to make the difference. I've seen things that are leading to lots of human rights abuses that are just based on really badly done formulas on Excel sheets, and how they're used and how they are used to assess criminality, for example, or the potential for criminality. And you don't need AI to do that, to do a bad thing out of a technology. You can do it with a stick. You don't even need a computer. So maybe just to close, I mean, that introduction, I'll say that it's really up to us, and it's really, I think the emphasis, the most important thing is the governance of any technology, whether it's AI or not. It's about who's making the decision, how they're making it, and what the accountability is.
Merci, Sherif. Thank you very much. I think you all exposed key critical question: who has the power, who makes the decision, who has the funds as well, and can influence so much what needs to be developed. You know, the ethical framework you talked about, Mr. Dallaire, as well, and the participation of women you talked about, Valentine, and the impact of the private sector, Maria, and good that it's changing and pushed by the employees. And yes, who's using that toy, if I may say, with a big T. So let's go maybe into more specific questions to the four of you from your perspective. And thanks again for sharing these big questions. I hope it helps very much the people participating in the thinking. Maria, shall I start by you? You praise the private sector and its norms. So how do we ensure that the AI applications developed for the social and environmental sectors and the one developed for the private sector have the same degree of ethics, of accountability, of quality, of sustainability, knowing, as well raised by the other panelists, that there is a debalance and an inequity in funding. Maria, can you take the floor? I think you're still muted, Maria. It's up to you today.
I'm muted again. This is a very good question. A question that has been bothering us for a while in the AI for Good community. How can we transfer the same thoroughness of achieving specific goals from the private sector into the social sector? And I would dare to say that it's not as complex as one might think. And in fact, we are in a process of doing something like this, being able to lift and shift the best practices in the private sector and adapt them, simplify it and adapt them to the social sector. Part of the AI Commons, an initiative which is a social enterprise spin-off outside the AI for Good, where people like Sherif, Element of AI, and Joshua, Benjo, and Mila have been part of us since the last 3 years. And one of the visions for this social enterprise AI Commons was exactly to create some sort of a bridge in between the problem owners, the ones in the field that will understand the problems, and they will be able to articulate the need to have a solution. And on the other hand, the solution owner, those who are sitting on not just technical capabilities, data sets, and infrastructure, but also companies like the big consultancies who have been developing framework and methodology to help solve a problem and achieve a solution that is sustainable. So in fact, I would say that we don't need as much financial resources. What we need is foster this knowledge exchange in between the two areas of society, private and social. And perhaps this is where the big challenge is it's easier to raise funding, especially in this context where social problems have become much more well known and understood in the private eye, than to change the mentalities and also have this work put in being able to simplify and translate those sophisticated tools developed for profit to be usable in the private, in the social sector. And I would say that when in terms of ethical frameworks, I don't think we need new ones. The reality is, because I work in this field, lots of very good and robust frameworks have been designed, and in private sector, because of the adoption, the design and adoption of AI, it's obviously much more accelerated than all the other sectors. We started piloting this framework, so we're in a process to see how good they are in practice. So if I were to also iterate of how can we use what we have in terms of ethical frameworks, the ones that are currently used in private into the social, I would say let's find the right enterprises, find the right groups and organizations that can help us come together around the framework like this, with the view of adapting it to the social enterprises rather than reinventing the wheel. I think what we need right now is to develop a sense of agility and being able to navigate complex issue in a logical manner. But I think in terms of both resources that are financial and non-financial, we have plenty. It's just a matter of making it work in a different context.
Merci, thank you, Maria. It's good. I like the idea of sharing knowledge. It's definitely the space where I think we need to be, and naturally, problem owners are as well solution owners, and they need technical people to have conversations, but they know the solutions, and that's as well a topic that I would like very much you all to as well input as well. How can we really be sure that people participate to solution, and especially the ones that are excluded, the most vulnerable group that usually are outside this conversation. Thank you very much. Speaking about that, Valentine, you raised that point in your introduction. You know, the digital gap has widened during the COVID pandemic. What are the concrete systemic solutions to this urgent problem? And as well with your angle, interesting angle as well about the women and the gender gap, and all the people excluded. How can we, you know, use and solutions the gaps? Valentine, up to you.
Thank you. Merci, Béatrice. I'm just going to put my timer on just so I keep track of 5 minutes, because I could probably talk for 30 minutes straight on this. Thank you for the amazing segue. I would like to point to a research that was done by Anna Jobin and 2 co-researchers, and it should be in your comments in the chat right now. It's an overview of the ethical guidelines worldwide. That was published already a year ago, so I believe hopefully things are changing. But at the time of publication, it showed that over 52 or 53, sorry, I haven't looked at the paper exactly very recently, but about over 50% at least of the ethical frameworks currently developed were done so by either the private sector or private government sector. Very few, as we saw, the funding in civil society organizations and access to AI, and therefore the understanding of the implications, the technical understanding to be able to voice their expertise. And thank you, Béatrice, for pointing out that they're not problem owners, they're actually solution owners. A lot of the work that I do at the United Nations is advocating for the expertise and the funding to be able to allow civil society organizations to present their expertise and be part of the development of these frameworks. The other thing that we can see in Dr. Anna Jobin's work is that a huge portion of our planet, of countries across the world, are not yet publishing and not being part of the development of these ethical frameworks. As we saw recently, if the private and government sector are the ones developing ethical frameworks, we still have the problem of underrepresentation of women in the development of these frameworks. So what I advocate for in general is to have a very iterative, not to have a fixed certification type. We're not ready for that yet. A certification of AI, of responsible AI, it would be inducing people into trusting something that was developed without civil society. So that's just something I wanted to point out, and I wanted to make sure I talked about solutions, because there are some really fun and interesting solutions. I like to talk about the role of the arts as an educator, as a mediator, as a democracy engagement tool, and just maybe point out, I can put that into the comments after, but the UN has published a report on the impact of COVID on women. 2 principal impacts that I'd like to point everybody's attention towards is there's been an increase in gender-based violence. It's dramatic here in Quebec. We've had about 10 feminicides in 10 weeks. It's like one a week. We have been suffering at the brunt of economic impact, and therefore the UN is urging all nations to engage in concrete support of women moving forward. And we're moving forward towards what? Towards digital economies. The digital transformation, on the other end, has increased extremely rapidly. So at the junction of those two factors that we can observe, it's extremely important to make sure that we have women included in the development and deployment of AI solutions. So that being said, maybe make sure that, again, we don't make the mistake of only offering training to learn how to code to women, but to really allow to fund informational, educational campaigns so that women can, and people who identify as women, as a diversity of perspectives can be added to how we choose to develop in the start place and how we govern it. So one of the things we've been advocating for the role of arts, we went across Canada in 2019 asking artists how they saw the impact of AI on their practices and on their communities and how they wanted to impact AI. So I can put that into chat as well. After that resulted in policy recommendations, some of the work that I did with a group at UNDESA on sustainable digital futures and digital governance. So we underscored the role of art. And when we go back again a little bit to funding multidisciplinary development of AI also increases not only the quality of the AI that we're producing, but also the number of women that will be part of these teams. It's still difficult in this day to, and that was a conversation at a global level with participants from various countries, to fund both AI research and art research at the same time within the same team, within the same AI funding program. So I do call upon governments to revisit the funding models for multidisciplinary research on AI. It will make more innovative, more creative, and better quality AI. I'm at 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going just to share very quickly in the chat our big announcement today. So here we go. This is a data collection annotation project. So from data collection to an interactive immersive art installation. So it's includes AI research, best curatorial practices research. So if you would like to have a look at it, there's a lot of information in there. You can look at the frequently asked questions. You'll see more information about this project because I don't want to overtake my time. I'm already at 6 minutes, but you're the first group that I'm sharing this with. So please have a look. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentine. You're very generous on your reference, and we need obviously to dig more because it's not going to be resolved in 1 hour for sure. So thanks for sharing so much, and like Maria, you're calling for sharing knowledge, cross-disciplinary as well, meetings where we can really learn and advance and move forward from one space of expertise to the other. So thank you, Mr. Dallaire. It's a question for you now about. In terms of future of peace and security. Definitely we need security before implementing even the SDGs, and how does it impact, especially in terms of the arms, the killer robots. You had really great ethical questions when you introduced us. Now when we go into the arms subject specifically, what can you tell us?
There are certain elements that I think need to be brought to the fore very clearly. The first one, when we're talking about peace security, we're talking about the possible use of AI and all kinds of not only weaponry, but intelligence use in information transformation into disinformation, and the manipulation of societies by false parameters of what is actually happening that can generate more and more human rights abuses and in fact sustain it. I mean, I'm going way beyond what Radio Milkalin did. But I think that the first is that if we really want the AI to be an asset to peace and security, to establish the atmospheres of security that will permit this sustainable development and will permit peace and security to be sustainable and not simply a sort of continuum of generational wars or conflicts, or in fact a rotating exercise of peace, reconciliation, peace, conflict, reconciliation, peace, conflict, and so on, because so many countries who have been in conflict, within 20 years are back at it. How do you go beyond and break that cycle? The human control of all this capability is essential, except that that's nice to say because humans are creating it, of course, and we hope for some time to come that they will lead the creation of it. But there is an absolute requirement for education, knowledge in the leadership structures of states and societies, and particularly of the political elites, in order to be able to understand and comprehend not only what is ongoing, but and its applications now, but anticipating what in fact is coming down the road and how that research is advancing and who's applying it and under what rules and regulations and what sort of parameters. That is absolutely critical, because right now the private sector has got to be held accountable for the responsibility of what they're creating to the states within which they're creating it, but they got to be held accountable to certain rules, regulations, ethical references, and the like. And although some work has been done, there is not, in my estimation, a methodology that guarantees that we do have a transparent and oversight by the civilian governance programs that exist in democracies and others, let alone how we oversee the non-state actors of actually creating systems that are responsible and are meeting certain fundamental standards that are not violating human rights by their mere creation and let alone by their use. And so there is, in my estimation, a vacuum still. The technology is moving, but the understanding of it and the mastery of it by those who ultimately may give the word to use it or not use it, or to see its use and abuse, that is lagging. And there's where I think the great effort must go in this fast evolving technological race that's going on within states, by states, and by non-state and private actors.
Very well said, Mr. Dallaire. Definitely accountability must be on the table, and standards and open and transparent for all of us citizens to be really aware and informed and fully informed. That's a key question. I'm worried as well about these raising of technology, and especially the question of security. People, this is Earth Day today, so we can't have that discussion without speaking about climate. And obviously, climate is a big threat to human rights and has link with these arrays of technologies. Sherif, your startup builds on engaging private sector into action, which is good for climate. And good for the goal 13 of the SDGs. So what's in it for them? How come the balance of the what's in it for them to work and move on climate, and Maya spoke about it as well, will serve the purpose of this goal and will serve as well the really, really urgent solutions we need for climate? Up to you, Sherif.
Thank you very much, Béatrice. And yes, today is Earth Day. I would say that we shouldn't have an Earth Day, because every day should be Earth Day, because we don't live on Mars. So it's not like there can be any other day. But on your question, it's I think Maria has said, as Maria has said, there is generally a lot more awareness and interest in climate and sustainability and ESG along many parts of the private sector. There's a lot more pressure from investors, whether these are institutional investors, huge sort of investors, global investors like BlackRock, or even small individual investors to sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and all of that. So it's definitely happening, and we should never underestimate the self-preservation instinct, because at the end of the day, the people running these companies, they have the same worries as everyone else. They have, some of them have younger kids who are telling them, look, what are you doing about the world that you're leaving to us? What's going to happen? And so I think it's there, but I think that the reality is also that, for businesses, it has to make business sense. It has to make economic and financial sense, because if by taking certain actions you're going to, instead of running a profit, you're going to be running a loss, then you're going to lose your job. So things have to be aligned so that the business objectives and climate objectives can go hand in hand, and that requires sort of the right policies, and this is where government's role is key, both in pushing innovation, in rewarding innovation, in supporting the private sector in transitioning to lower carbon technologies. That's key, and I think I think in many cases, and of course that it's not always like that. Now, in many cases, it's not so much the will, but in practice, when someone goes into their office and looks at, how do I keep my job? How do I make my company still successful, still work, all of that, respond to my shareholders? How do I square all these things together? And the key thing is that we can't really wait. So we cannot kind of wait for the inevitable, come to 2030 and realize that everything is, going terribly wrong. And, we do what happened with the pandemic, is that, we knew there was the stress of the pandemic. We didn't prepare very much. We do the same with climate change. We take action, drastic action, but too late. And that leads to much more disruption and much bigger losses than otherwise. What we know is that people are not good at long-term planning, at looking at risk, even if it's known, but in the long-term horizon. And we need to change that equation, and changing that equation requires the policies to really promote the changes today rather than the changes by 2050. Saying we're going to do something by 2050 is as good as saying, well, we'll do it someday, one day, maybe, perhaps. It's too far into the future. We need to be much more aggressive about it.
Thanks, Sherif. Indeed, more short-term solutions so people will move and will embark. I am inviting the panelists and really great inputs on and many thoughts, and I hope it gives the envy for everyone to dig more and to look for more answers and questions. But I would invite the panelists for one little challenge. Questions about what should be our priorities for the greatest use of AI and the benefits of the SDGs. So can you all answer in very short words all together about priorities? Where should we go? Maria?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent way to end this fantastic conversation. I would say that the one thing that we need to be continue doing is foster multi-stakeholder collaboration. We're very far from working with each other, coming from different fields, from different parts of society. And as you've seen here in UK, where we all came together in this magic AI UK ecosystem to co-create public policy and contribute to development of regulation for AI, I think we need to continue this going forward, and being able to bring much more contributors from the private space into those debates, very much from the principles of we see in the panel today, to get people used with the idea the only way to get AI to work for us in the right way is to have this multi-party, multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approach, which we need to learn together.
I love that. Thank you, Maria. Can I ask Valentine? Valentine, your priorities,
Sure.
what do you think?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to address one little elephant that was in the room all day, because I have many hopes for AI, but in order to be able to achieve them, not only do we need to change various funding models and structures, but also AI requires massive amounts of data to work on. So we need to look into issues of how biased the data is around women, which is the project that I shared with you earlier. That's part of that, one of those solutions, maybe step in the right direction. But also been working a lot on data trusts and data partnerships. And the business models and economic models that we're moving towards have an impact on how much we're able to share, who's collecting data, who's sharing it, with who, and with what purpose. So I just wanted to finish very quickly on that note, because that will impact our capacity to be able to enable a lot of those amazing, inspiring AI solutions for SDGs.
It needed to be said, indeed, Valentine. Thank you for raising the big data question, and who owns it, and who's sharing. Can I ask General Dallaire, your priorities? What do you think? Can you share your thoughts with us?
There is, in my opinion, an absolute requirement in order to establish a capability of ensuring that the security sector and the government sector, with the other disciplines from the NGO world, from the pure business world, are able to provide classified materials that can, in fact, give us the opportunity of not only looking at how things are evolving now, but how we are projecting this stuff into the future. And the future is not looking anymore 20 years down the road and hoping that we've got a bit of a sense of what's going on. The future is so fast in this dimension is that we've got to be able to really look even 5 years down the road. And to do that, you need deliberate structures that can, in fact, be held in a classified fashion from different disciplines to be able to exchange in order to ensure that the evolution of the AI applications are done within the parameters of our social democratic societies.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Dallaire. Merci beaucoup pour cette invitation à nous projeter, puis à le projeter ensemble aussi, avec différents milieux. Et je pense que c'est beaucoup le message qu'on entend. Sorry, why did I switch in French suddenly? So thank you. The big message about sharing and projecting and doing it at multi players. This is indeed a strong message from you all so far. Sherif, your priorities.
I was feeling the pressure to switch to French as well there. So
Please do.
Yeah. So I think I'll go back to that point I made earlier, which is the who's doing what and who's making decisions and who's deploying AI. How are they using it? How are you using the opportunities that are out there to support the achievement of the SDGs with AI or any other technology? And I think it's really important that we do not lose sight of at the end of the day, what makes a difference, whether it's bad or good, is what people do. And I think we sometimes we run the risk of focusing too much on the technology and not enough on the people behind it.
I like this wise sentence, focus on the people and how the technology can help the people. Thank you so much, you all. Really, I'm not a tech expert, so it gives me great pleasure to dig more about all the things that you and thoughts and warnings and good hopes that you've given to us all today. So it's Earth Day. Let's be hopeful, and let's manage as well to make them meet all the stakeholders in this technology and for good of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Béatrice. Thank you, Sherif, Valentine, Maria, and General Dallaire. I'd like to ask you now if you could leave the studio, or my colleagues will leave because we have one other person for the next one that can't get in. But I want to thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And we are about to start the next panel. So we're going to ask we're just looking to see who of all our colleagues are here for the next. It looks like we're almost all here. I know we have one colleague who's not with us yet, but he was trying to get in, so I'm sure he'll join us in a sec. So maybe what I'll do now is I'll introduce the moderator for the next panel. That the panel is on the ethics of AI. How can we ensure democratic governance? Very timely discussion, and it kind of ties into the AI and UN SDG goals, or there's a connection there about the ethics of how it's being developed. But I would like to now hand the floor to the moderator, who is Philippe André Rodriguez. And Philippe André is the Deputy Director of the Center for International Digital Policy at Global Affairs Canada. And I just say thank you very much for being a sponsor of this event, Global Affairs Canada. We couldn't have done this without your support. So now I'd like to Philippe André, the floor is yours, and hopefully our other speaker will be able to join us.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and merci Marie in the background doing all of the important administrative work. So thank you so much for organizing this great conference. Amazing topics thus far. I think it's been really interesting to hear about not only the harms, but the potential of AI for good, really internationally. So that's been very great. And so this panel really focuses more specifically on how to govern this technology. So really focusing on the governance structures, as Kyle said, really thinking through what does a democratic governance framework looks like, and really thinking through what is democratic governance when we're talking about digital technologies creating its own risks, its own challenges. And we have three amazing panelists today to discuss this topic. So without further ado, I will introduce the three of them before giving them the floor. So the first one, Sasha Rubel, who is a program specialist on digital innovation and transformation at UNESCO, where she leads the organization's work on artificial intelligence. And obviously, UNESCO is increasingly a core player, especially in the context of the United Nations systems when it comes to the ethics of AI at the global level. We have Jan Kleijsen, who I hope was able to join us, who is the Director of Information Society in the Directorate General of Human Rights and Rule of Law at the Council of Europe. Council of Europe, another very important regional player on AI, obviously having a very important process ongoing on the governance of artificial intelligence, which I am sure he will speak to in much more details than I will. And finally, Professor Laurence Devillers, who is a professor of AI at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, or in English, the French National Center for Scientific Research. So three different perspectives, which I think will really help inform our conversation today. One global, one regional, and from an academic perspective. So let's maybe start this conversation with a very quick, 2-5 minutes presentation about your perspective on this question of democratic governance of AI. What does ethical AI looks like? What does human rights respecting AI looks like? As we've heard from other panelists throughout the conference, this distinction between ethics and human rights. So turning first to Sasha for some remarks. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, André Philippe. I feel that there are two issues at hand encapsulated in the title of this session. One is, of course, how to ensure democratic governance of AI, but the second is also how can AI be harnessed to promote democracy, including in the ways in which principles for AI governance are developed. Today, as all of you know, there are more than 180 principles, standards, and frameworks for AI, and I find it particularly auspicious that this panel is happening just after the European Commission released the proposal for regulation on a European approach for artificial intelligence. From UNESCO's perspective, we see three key areas where work is necessary in order to ensure democratic governance for AI. The first is that we need to understand what we mean by democratic governance, but we also need to understand what we mean by AI. At UNESCO, we understand democracy isn't just about voting for your leaders. It's also about understanding the issues at hand. And if data is the lifeblood of democracy, the way in which we think about data and its role in AI has to be on the agenda. But first, we need to understand what we're talking about. And here for UNESCO, we see AI literacy, including AI literacy for policy and decision makers, as key. What is AI? What isn't AI? But also the need to reinforce human rights and ethics literacy. And for UNESCO, this is extremely linked to the principle of transparency, so that we can move from the idea of can I develop it to should I develop it. And the starting point for UNESCO's work on all of this is human rights. So to give the right answers, we need to be asking ourselves the right questions. What do we mean by transparency and explainability? And for example, COVID AI-powered contact tracing apps is an example of how important it is to ensure both AI literacy, but also human rights and ethics literacy, so we can have a truly inclusive and global conversation about this issue. The second area of emphasis for UNESCO in terms of democratic governance is our conviction that building a participatory methodology for addressing the challenges of the digital age, including the governance of AI, is as important as addressing the challenges themselves. So we need to be creative. And Eileen Donahoe, in one of the opening sessions, called for radical new thinking about alternative business models. But I would also call here for the need for radical new thinking about how we develop public policy. We don't need to do governance in the traditional way for something that is so very different. And from UNESCO's perspective, AI in itself is not necessarily the revolution. It is the steam engine for the revolution and an opportunity to rethink participatory public policy processes across boundaries, but also across sectors and stakeholder groups. And here for UNESCO, multi-stakeholder discussion is key. And Maria Axente in the previous panel emphasized the need for these kinds of discussions. But I would also add that we need to move from multi-stakeholder discussions to platforms for multi-stakeholder decision-making, because we can't develop policies and expect them to be adopted without everyone having a seat at the table and not just a folding chair. So the end users need to be a part of the conversation, but also part of decision-making. And this echoes what Villas-Dar mentioned in, again, one of the opening panels about the need for the people at large to be the architects of their digital future and also the architects of the policies that will impact them. And then thirdly and lastly, we need to rethink how we cooperate in translating principles into practice and how we learn from each other. And Elinor Ostrom said something which I find very inspiring, which is a core goal of public policy should be to facilitate the development of institutions that bring out the best in humans. But I would add here that we also need to develop processes and methodologies for cooperation that bring out the best of everyone. And there are a lot of examples, which I look forward to sharing later on in this panel, that are coming from the Global South, where models exist for participatory public policy processes in the field of AI and translating AI principles into democratic governance and practices. And then lastly, I would close by saying that there's a lot we can in fact do with artificial intelligence as a technology to ensure democratic governance of AI. So using AI, for example, to host global debates about artificial intelligence, moving from questions of AI governance to questions of how can we govern via artificial intelligence. And for this, we need connective tissue and to convene the conveners. But we also need to build capacity building tools. And I'll close here emphasizing that UNESCO is in the process of developing a standard setting instrument in the field of the ethics of artificial intelligence with our 193 countries, an experts group that comes from all around the world with 24 experts from different regions and different stakeholder groups. And we've developed this process through multi-stakeholder consultations. And on Monday, in fact, we will have our intergovernmental meeting where we will fine-tune this recommendation that will be submitted to our general conference in November for consideration of adoption. And I'll close here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And I think you raised an important point about the importance of creativity when it comes to governance in a digital age, and really the voice and the capacity that voices coming from the Global South can bring to those conversations. I think that that's absolutely key to make sure that we are inclusive when we're talking about the governance of digital tech. And also just to mention that big thanks to UNESCO for having the meetings next week in the afternoon so that I don't have to wake up at 4 in the morning to engage in those negotiations at UNESCO. So now we'll turn to Jan Kleijsen, who again, focusing more on the Council of Europe and the work that is ongoing at another very important international multilateral organization on artificial intelligence governance. Jan, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Philippe. It's great to be back in Canada, if only virtually. As a graduate of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs in Ottawa, it's always a great pleasure to be with the Canadian University. A few words about the Council of Europe. It's not to be confused with the EU. It's a 47 member state organization born out of the ashes of World War II, created by the likes of Winston Churchill, de Gasperi, Adenauer. And its mission is to protect and promote human rights, rule of law and democracy in its member states and beyond. And the Council of Europe does this on a law-based approach because in order to ensure these values I mentioned, the Council of Europe approach has been to establish treaties and a lot of non-binding legal instruments, guidelines, soft law, if you like. And we have done so in the field of technology. 40 years ago, the Council of Europe was the first international organization to establish a treaty on data protection, which became the standard that also led recently to the GDPR of the European Union, for instance. The Council of Europe also has 20 years ago, established the first treaty and still the world's only treaty to fight cybercrime. It is therefore natural that given the impact because why are we looking at artificial intelligence? The impact artificial intelligence is already having and will increasingly have on the lives of our citizens and will directly affect, as was also said already by previous speakers, directly affect their human rights. It has a direct effect on the rule of law. And of course, it has a direct effect on how democracy is functioning. To stick to the latter point for the moment, as this is the title of the panel, how can we ensure democratic governance? It is very important to recall that, artificial intelligence, given its impact, should not be regulated by companies alone, nor should it be regulated by companies in authoritarian governments. It should be regulated by democratic governments, with the cooperation, of course, and with the involvement in a multi-stakeholder way of business community and of civil society and academia. But it is important that elected representatives, elected governments, and elected parliamentarians have a say in the rules that govern the design, the application of artificial intelligence. Within the Council of Europe, we have, our governments have set up, and you're indeed participating in this, several of you are participating in this work, a committee to establish a possible legal framework on artificial intelligence, a possible binding legal framework. And this would be a very important step towards a democratic governance of AI, because any binding legal framework will not only have to be signed by democratically elected governments within the Council of Europe or elsewhere, but it will also have to be ratified by national parliaments, so national parliamentarians, which means that also opposition parties, not only the ruling parties in government will have a look at it, but also all parties that find themselves in opposition will have a chance to examine the result and will have to vote for it. So that, I think, is an important element. We have within the Council of Europe representatives of national parliaments. In fact, they're meeting this very week. And last year, they adopted no less than 7 reports unanimously on issues relating to the governance of artificial intelligence. And needless to say, all these 7 reports are under consideration by our governmental experts who are looking at this possible legal framework. I would also like to point out, just to conclude, I'll try to be brief, that in addition to governments at the table, We also have our colleagues from international organizations, including UNESCO, but also very much the European Union and the OECD and several others at the table to discuss with us the way forward. And the proposals that were published yesterday by the European Union, by the Commission, for a possible regulation of the European Union will no doubt provide an important contribution to the work of AI. And the processes are complementary. There is no competition or a race, as sometimes suggested. I mentioned data protection before. It's a very good example where the EU has a regulation, but the Council of Europe has a convention supported by the European Union for those countries that are not within the European Union. And we very much expect that in the field of artificial intelligence, we will go the same way, that the consultations that will now start and which are likely to last for a bit in the European Union on their proposals will feed into the work of CAHAI, and we're very confident that our work will feed into the ongoing and now starting consultations of the EU in order to have two complementary products at the end, two deliverables, both with high democratic value, an internal EU regulation for 27 countries, and an international treaty, I hope, which will incorporate many of the same ideas, but which will be open on an equal basis to countries around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was a great overview of what is informally known as CAHAI for those of us in those circles. I think there's one point in your presentation, Jan, that I think we'll come back to after, which is really the role of governments, democratically elected governments in the governance versus other types of stakeholders. But we can get back to it after these introductory remarks. So now we'll turn to Professor Devillers, who will give a less multilateral perspective on this issue, so potentially a more applied perspective. So Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup for this invitation. I would like to focus on a point of cooperation between countries. The European Commission yesterday published a regulation on the use of AI to restore trust. It's a political act, as you mentioned previously. This legal framework is needed to foster the development and adoption of AI for protection of public interest, including health, safety, fundamental rights, freedoms of people in our societies. So I think that we have to definitively use a global vision for the problem of AI. I will explain. I am now involved in the Global Partnership on AI, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative which aims to bridge the gap between theory and practice on AI by supporting cutting-edge research and applied activities on AI-related priorities. And I'm involved in the Future of Work, for example, panel. So this initiative has been built with the OECD recommendation on artificial intelligence, and JPI brings together engaged minds and expertise from science, industry, civil society, governments, international organizations, and academia to foster international cooperation. For me, is the beginning of the vision. You know, this initiative was launched in June 2020, and this JPI is the friction on an idea developed by the last G7 in Biarritz under the Canadian and French presidencies. So at the moment, this committee has 15 funding members, which are, like example, Australia, but also Canada, France, obviously, but Germany, India, Mexico, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, and so on, and European Union also. So we need to emphasize this kind of initiative, which are really interesting because it's a multi-stakeholder initiative with, at the same time, researchers and people involved in government, and also a pluridisciplinarity. And this dimension, this pluridisciplinary dimension, it's really needed to understand this real vision we have to build together. And my other point will be about the sustainable development adopted by all United Nations members in 2015. We have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing in a global partnership. So we need to push this idea of AI in this context, in my opinion, because AI is two things. One is the 18 SDG things, maybe. I mean, AI is transforming deeply the society. Digital technology brings with it challenge and opportunities and hopes and fear, sure. But there is a deep redefinition of a lot of things. It's crucial to anticipate these evolutions and to question ourselves on the redefinition of the relationship to oneself and to others in all spheres of social relations, family, friends, work, and so on. The means to respect people's autonomy and to fight against the digital divide, the ability to remain sovereign in our democratic choices, the conditions to exercise our freedom will in a relation between human beings and machines. And I spoke a lot of times about co-evolution, human-machine co-evolution, how to be sure that we will not be a slave of this machine. So it's very meaningful to imagine how we build the machine, how we build a machine that can adapt to the people, with interacting with people and adapting the knowledge, and how we will be in front of these machines. And also the social, economic, and environmental sustainability of digital developments. So I think it's a larger point of view to have, and the vision we must share together in all the countries, all the democracies, for me, is a very, very important now. So the digital transformation of society challenges us to think about humanism in the digital age. And we also have to use the research, use the potential of research. We have to anticipate these benefits and risks with the AI, and the benefits of also to have a large divide, democratic governance instead of the GAFAM governance of the world.
Thank you very much for these remarks, and obviously Canada is very proud to be one of the co-instigators of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, along with our colleagues from the government of France, and we obviously think it adds a layer, just to put it on the table there. So maybe going back to the initial question of democratic governance, and really, what does that mean? What does that look like when we're talking about democratic governance? And it seems that the three initiatives that have been discussed thus far by our panelists not necessarily contradict itself, but bring a different perspective. Obviously, Sasha, you mentioned very, very multi-stakeholder consultations, very wide, very global in nature. UNESCO is what UNESCO is doing. Council of Europe, a little bit more narrow. Jan, you mentioned the importance, the fundamental importance of democratically elected officials as being central to any type of democratic governance. And obviously, in the context of the Global Partnership on AI, a lot of the governance structure is actually with the experts and less with the governments, a little bit more independent there. So I was thinking maybe we could reflect on this, and what, in your perspective, really asking the question directly, what does democratic governance of artificial intelligence looks like in practice? What do we need to actually call a governance mechanism democratic? And maybe I will start with Jan first, because you mentioned the importance of one stakeholder group. So maybe if you wanted to reflect on how this stakeholder group could interact with industry, with civil society, academia, in the Council of Europe, but also elsewhere.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Of course, democratically elected governments and parliaments, I should say, because I keep insisting on parliaments, perhaps because I worked for 20 years for the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, but it is really to indicate that it's not just the government of the day that has a role. It is also the government of tomorrow that has a role. In other words, all parties in Parliament should be involved. All democratic forces should be elected democratic forces should be involved, but of course not alone. And you're very right to mention civil society, as indeed business partners and academia. And in the committee that you also kindly referred to, CAHAI, which is looking at this framework, possible legal framework, everyone has a seat at the table. We have business partners, some 28 now, including virtually all the big US firms, but also associations of small European companies, have agreed to partner with the Council of Europe through an exchange of letters, subscribing to our values, human rights, rule of law, and democracy, to help. And of course, civil society has been with the Council of Europe for many years, and we have some 200 treaties, and many of them have been established with a very active input from civil society. Something I would like to touch upon is what you mentioned, perhaps a slightly more narrow focus of a regional organization as the Council of Europe. But that may be deceptive, the term regional in this case, because take the Cybercrime Convention. It is true, it was established by the Council of Europe, but with the participation of our observer states, who are also now sitting at the table on our work on artificial intelligence, which are Canada, the United States, Japan, Mexico, and the Holy See. And the Cybercrime Convention has many states from the Global South that have signed and ratified this convention. We have 65 countries that have ratified, and they include, for instance, the Philippines, they include Sri Lanka, Senegal. So many non-Western countries have adhered to this. And in the framework of the Cybercrime Convention, we carry out what we call capacity building programs. And last year, despite the pandemic, we were active in 120 countries. The year before, 2019, physically present through seminars in 130 countries worldwide. So on some issues, the standards initially set in the Council of Europe take on a much wider meaning. Accession, however, is subject to a number of criteria, which sometimes also leads to debate, of course. But for me, therefore, the three elements I would like to put on the table are governments are important when it comes to binding law. Binding law, and in the Council of Europe believe that certain applications of AI, not all, but certain applications, should be really the subject of law, first of all, and probably also of binding law. And as I said in my opening statement, what is binding law should not be decided just by companies or just by other actors. That should be done by elected governments with the help of others. And the importance of the elected parliamentarians I've already mentioned is to give everyone a chance. What is also important for democratic governments, that's my final point, the new point here I'd like to make, is the participation, and Sasha rightly mentioned this in her opening statement, those that are concerned, the citizens. And for citizens to be able to have an opinion on this and to actually express also, because when we speak about elections, that is people electing electing their representatives, for the people to make informed choices about who should represent them. Also, as regards the views of politicians on artificial intelligence, of course, awareness is very much needed. And raising awareness of the issues, of digital issues in general, and AI issues in particular, is a very important step towards a truly democratic governance of AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And just building off of that, Sasha, you rightly pointed again to the importance of having inclusive governance structures and giving a voice to those that are traditionally voiceless. One question that usually comes up when we're talking about these kind of processes is how to ensure that these processes are actually inclusive, yes, but also that they are effective, right? Because the more inclusive we are, the more difficult it is to actually get to solutions. So I'm wondering, from your perspective and in the context of UNESCO, if you've had that difficulty of balancing inclusivity with effectiveness, and if there are ways from what you've said, and if you've touched upon some potentially creative solutions that you saw in your work that could help bridge that kind of difficult gap between inclusivity and effectiveness.
Sure, thank you very much, Philippe-André. I would in fact argue the opposite, is that we can only be effective if we are inclusive. And that multi-stakeholderism isn't a way, it is the only way, because it's only by having a diversity of voices and also a diversity of sectors around the table that we can develop public policies at the national level, but also directives at the global level that will have impact. Nobody likes being told what to do at the end of the game. They like being part of the development of these public policies so that we can make sure that they can have impact, but also be implemented. And here I'd like to highlight something reflecting specifically on what Jan mentioned and your provocative question, Philippe-André, is that we talk a lot about this idea of moving from principles to practice. And it's something that we saw in the AI needs assessment in Africa that we undertook, where we asked governments in Africa, what is missing at the national level to translate principles for responsible and ethical AI into practice? And the number one answer that we got is not only AI literacy and human rights and ethics literacy, but a new understanding of how to work on transversal public policy development, given that AI touches across a lot of different ministries. But here I'd like to say that there's also an opportunity to, instead of moving from principles to practice, move in fact from practice to principles and ensure a kind of feedback loop from the ground up. We need to be learning about and from what is being done on the ground level. What are the challenges that, for example, a Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation in, let's say, Senegal is facing? That, for example, an engineer who's working on AI-based solutions for sustainable development can help inform, to say, okay, we're talking about transparency and explainability. Here's where we're struggling actually developing AI-based solutions that take into consideration these principles. Here's what could possibly be taken on board in the development of public policies in this field. And that feedback loop is absolutely essential. And here, I'd like to add that the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation has a very clear four-pronged approach to make sure that we translate our commitment to democratic governance into practice. And it's based on connecting the unconnecting, protecting human rights online, and all of our work at UNESCO is guided by this principle and what we call our Internet Universality Framework, which guides our work more broadly on digital governance, which argues that digital policies must be rights-based, they must promote openness, they must promote accessibility, and they must be multi-stakeholder. We also see the need to respect the third prong, standards and principles in the field of, for example, the ethics of artificial intelligence, but also remedy. And here, speaking directly to your point, Philippe-André, there is a real opportunity, building on what Jan said, to involve members of the technical community and civil society and the private sector that plays a key role to say, how can we co-develop tools, for example, like human rights impact assessments, algorithmic audits, bias impact statements, to make sure that we are held accountable in terms of the translation of these aspirations of ethical AI into practice. But three things are still missing. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the first is AI literacy, The second is human rights and ethics literacy. And the third, building on what I was saying earlier on the AI needs assessment, is literacy in how to develop transversal approaches. And there are some great examples. The United Kingdom is one example. Rwanda, Senegal, and Tunisia are other examples. And UNESCO is working on the ground in developing participatory public policy playbooks and mechanisms to make sure that at the national level, AI policies are inclusive. Very concretely, we're working on the ground in several African countries to make sure that otherwise marginalized groups like youth and women have a seat at the table so that we can redress issues that should be of major concern beyond the economic concern in terms of the development of AI, like issues related to the future of cultural diversity, to peace and security, to bias and non-discrimination. These are issues that need to be at the heart of the ways in which we are ensuring democratic governance of AI, but how AI can contribute to democracy. And it's only through ensuring an AI as a sector and as a technology and as a governance mechanism as diverse as the societies that we aspire to create that we can make sure that we are indeed effective and efficient in translating these policies into programs and practices that are implementable.
Thank you. And I would mention, so on the UN Secretary General Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, there is a lot of interesting work being done around this topic of digital inclusion. And Canada is proud to be one of the co-champions at that table alongside the governments of Mexico and UN Women. So a lot of interesting work, developing some interesting metrics to really measure inclusivity. So lots of interesting work in that area as well. And going back to a point you made, Professor Devillers, about the role and potentially the amplified or the role that is kind of too big for some players when we're talking about multi-stakeholder governance. You mentioned obviously the role that big tech companies can play in some of these processes, and earlier in this conference, we've also heard the role that some countries and some authoritarian regimes can play in some of those processes and undermine really democracy, human rights, rule of law. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how are there ways in which we can kind of mitigate that risk of creating structures that, yes, are multi-stakeholder, but that give too big a voice to some actors to the detriment really of those that potentially might be the most affected by those technologies?
I think the answer of your response is very political also. So it's a choice also to try to avoid this manipulation from the big companies. So in Europe, we imagine to build together a system to share data, to a lot of to have committee together and to try to avoid this kind of situation. But I would like to enlighten another point. In my opinion, to be in a democratic governance of AI, we need to go to the way to give the awareness to a lot of the citizens, the most citizens of possible in different countries. And for me, there are two ways. One is education. So we need to go at school to explain what is the AI, what are the risks, and how we can help people to be less naive in front of these systems, and explain also the governance of these tools. The second point is the work. So establishing the principle that the human must remain at the center of things should facilitate the acceptance of AI, but also the understanding of AI, both in the workplace and among citizens. So it's a formidable opportunity, I think. AI is invisible, so seeking to make it more transparent will give greater meaning to whatever we are going to do with. And in addition to the red lines laid down by the Commission, we need to have a debate within companies, both those that produce AI and those that use it, about the limits of what machines can do and the possibilities they offer. The aim is not to replace man with AI, but to allow AI and mankind to cooperate. And this collaboration should enable collective intelligence. In this context, machines must not bear any responsibility. They should operate autonomously when executing tasks they are mastered, but they cannot be responsible. An AI machine is not creative in the human sense. But however, it's of great importance to be able to empower all the citizens. And if the machine is able to create a lot of possible things, if it's in fact the human that say it is important, it is new, it is beauty, this is beauty inside, or it is useful. And I think within companies, discussion of AI will have to be ongoing, as reflection on ethical consideration will never cease. And we are going to save so much time by using machines that we really must take the time to explain AI, to educate it, to experiment, and to correct what are doing AI. And there is a benefit to be gained by the humans employed in the company collectively, defining what machines can contribute. And this collective construction process is very vital for me, as it restores meaning to the work done by humans. So, to summarize, people will need to develop a dual attitude in front of AI. On one hand, a relationship of trust, accepting the ability to predict what is going to happen and to do what is asked of them. And on the other hand, a relationship of doubt, being able to question what the machine says and does. If we are not able to use this mechanism in the work, at school, for educate people, I think it will be not a democratic debate, a democratic governance of the AI.
Thank you. And really this raises one theme, I think, that we've heard previously in the conference, and is this need to govern a technology that we do not fully yet understand, and that will continue to evolve as we go. And there is this tension really sometimes between, and I think, Jan, you're absolutely right. The notion of a race is probably way too overrated when we're talking about norms, but there is still this pressure, this political pressure, really to develop strong principles at the very least to govern the development and use of AI systems. And so perhaps asking you, how can we reconcile this relationship? How can we reconcile this continuing development of the research on the implications of artificial intelligence with the need really to protect already some harms that we're seeing and foster governance structures that will enable human rights, democracy, rule of law to be not only protected but really promoted?
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip, for that. And let me come back to the question of democratic governments here, because some issue, Sasha has mentioned it. I'd like to develop a little bit more. Is the inclusivity. We also have to ensure that the AI is developed not only, to put it bluntly, by white males. I think there is a real concern that there is not enough gender diversity, gender equality as regards the design and development of AI. There is not enough of cultural, ethnic, other diversities in the people that are actually developing the tools. And we just heard, and I fully agree, that increasingly machines will take over from human beings. But let me give you an example. In most of our countries, there are requirements for the civil service to represent various segments of society. The civil service in most democratic countries will need to have a certain gender balance. It will have to need a certain cultural balance. It must ensure that there is diversity among civil servants. Now, if governments increasingly outsource decisions and decision-making processes that were traditionally carried out by human civil servants to machines, but that these machines to put it shortly, that the algorithms and the deep learning, everything that is put in there, is not conceived by a diverse group of people. That there is no gender diversity there, there is no ethnic cultural diversity there. It is again, to put it bluntly, white males with a similar background. Then you get a mismatch because then the government services that are required to offer a variety of views and a variety of perspectives. Also, of course, to counter the bias. We're all biased. We all have an inherent bias based on our education, our beliefs, our upbringing, our academic or other professional background. And it's exactly why it is required that civil services recruit more diversely. And of course, there's an anecdote which demonstrates this. You will have seen in the newspapers just before the pandemic, this huge ad, and it was of course also on the internet, but it was interesting enough also in the traditional media, the printed media, a huge ad by Amazon informing the public that its human resources department would no longer be using artificial intelligence to recruit to Amazon, for the reason that it had been pointed out, and the company had fortunately taken notice, that female candidates for senior positions were automatically rejected because the algorithms were developed and by males, and they used as data the company structure. And at the time, at least, the company structure was such that there were no women in senior positions, and therefore the algorithm decided there shouldn't be. You may see this as an anecdote, but it's actually quite a serious case if you would relate this also to government services. And there has been in my own country a huge scandal, which actually led to the government resigning over family allocations, where also algorithms were used, and where slight errors in spelling of people, especially of migrant origin, led to the algorithms deciding that they were fraudulent, and they were prosecuted, had to pay back, and this has led to suicide and huge crisis amongst actually tens of thousands of people because of a bias in a particular government system that was automated. So I think there are real concerns to ensure that at the design stage there is not only privacy by design, human rights by design, but there should also be diversity by design. And finally, it is also important that, and that's where governments come in again, to try to ensure that the tools that are developed are not only the tools that are most profitable and not the tools that give most control, but the tools that are most necessary for our society. And I think that would be an important step. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe Sasha, just if you wanted to get in on this question, flexibility, importance of thinking through models that can accommodate these changing circumstances.
Sure. Thank you very much. I love, Jan, what you just said in terms of diversity by design. And I just want to expand that momentarily to link to my main argument in terms of revising the way in which we go about developing public policies in a more agile and participatory way. Because I read a statistic recently that shocked me, which showed that a better representation of diverse mindsets in the development and deployment of AI would reduce stereotypes and the negative consequences they lead to by ensuring diversity by design in teams. And it was shown in this research that if the teams who are designing AI-based solutions are not more diverse and inclusive, and I think by extension we can apply this very clearly to questions of democratic governance and public policy making, evidence suggests that by 2022, 85% of AI projects will deliver erroneous outcomes due to bias. So a lot of the arguments that countries are using in terms of harnessing AI for innovation and commercialization are economic ones. But this shows very clearly that the economic argument is in fact linked to the diversity argument, because without this diversity, there will not be the development of AI-based solutions that contribute to sustainable growth in developed and developing countries alike. But I also just want to reflect on, Jan, on what you said in terms of automation and jobs, because it links to what Laurence was saying earlier, is that there is this massive fear, and a lot of the work on democratic governance and AI public policy is focused on questions of the future of work in terms of the idea that AI will take all of our jobs. And there's a lot of really interesting research building on what you were saying earlier, Jan, about the gender dimension, that the people who will be the most impacted by this wave of automation is in fact women. But at the same time, 80% of jobs that will exist in 10 years don't even exist yet. So this speaks directly to the point that Laurence was making in terms of the need to invest in digital literacy and AI literacy so that citizens are empowered to not only be consumers, but also creators of AI-based solutions, and by extension, AI-based public policies and public policies on artificial intelligence. And for us at UNESCO, this is absolutely key. But I'd like to build further on what Jan was saying, to say, for us at UNESCO, there are several issues that are overlooked currently. Among them, issues like cultural diversity, like inclusion, and like peace. But one of the key areas that we see is absolutely crucial, linking to broader debates worldwide, is the link between the twin digital and green transformation. And for us at UNESCO, we see the link, for example, between the development of public policies and programs for artificial intelligence and public policies and programs that protect our planet and issues like climate change and biodiversity as absolutely essential. But in order to do this successfully, we need to make sure that we are developing public policies in themselves as policies, but also public policies as processes that are as agile and innovative as the tech industry themselves. And it's something I know Jan and I, with Yannick, talk about it all the time, where members of civil society will say, great that these international organizations are doing the work to develop these standards and frameworks and recommendations. But it's going to take you so long to develop these policy directives that by the time those policy directives are adopted, another technology will need standard setting like quantum computing or 5G, etc. And what we need to do here is ensure inclusivity and diversity, but also ensure agility and innovation in the ways in which we can develop these public policies to respond to a rapidly changing tech ecosystem. And that's why UNESCO is working with the Quebec Institute for Artificial Intelligence. We recently launched a call for ideas on how to address blind spots in AI public policy development, AI as a technology, and AI as a sector. Because there will be new issues in 2 years, in 2 months, in 20 years that are not necessarily covered in the current policy frameworks that we are developing. And our responsibility is to have them on our radar so that we can be thinking about them as of now. But I would close here, Philippe André, in saying, and I love what Jan said again, and you can tell that we work very closely between the Council of Europe and UNESCO and are very aligned in our work in terms of the idea that there is no race. And here, in order to be efficient in what we're doing in terms of public policy, we need to work together. And there's a huge misconception more broadly that international and regional organizations are in competition with one another. We are not. We talk to each other almost on a daily basis, and we all get along. And this is also why UNESCO, with the Council of Europe, with the OECD, with the European Commission, the Inter-American Development Bank, and others, have committed to developing a global portal called globalpolicy.ai, which brings together all of the resources and policy directives of our respective international and regional organizations, but also all of the comparative advantages that each of our organizations bring. To say, let's work together to make sure that governments, private sector, civil society are equipped not only with the understanding of AI and public policy initiatives, but also with the necessary capacity building tools in order to translate these principles into impactful and civil society oriented policies at the national level that can then be translated into concrete programs that harness AI and technology for the greater good.
Thank you so much. And I think it's really important also that you mentioned this gap that I know UNESCO is working on, but increasingly other organizations are thinking about around, you know, this digital transformation and the green agenda, and really thinking about, you know, what does sustainable digital transformation looks like. I know in the government of Canada, this is definitely something we're thinking about, how to create digital services that are green, that are sustainable. So this is definitely, it feels like it's really an emerging issue, and something that we'll need to continue to think about how to do this in a proactive way. Returning to you, Laurence, so you also mentioned the issue with sustainability and flexibility, and the importance of having this dialogue with citizens. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, from a more technical perspective or GPay perspective, what is the role of researchers like yourself in an environment like this one? Where do you see yourself playing a role to ensure this kind of flexibility and democratic oversight going forward?
Thank you. Our role as a researcher is to push the huge deontology first from the creator of AI, from this perspective to use this AI new technology, because there will be a lot of new things in few time in the different product with a lot of conscience about the risk. And it's very important to educate on these things and to do research on that. So my research at my lab in CNRS in France is definitively turned into this vision. So I work currently on nudging with agent, with chatbots. And is effective. That is very easy to nudge people with a conversational dialogue system. So I would like to say that there is not only this red line to put on. We have to focus on the different technologies that we are pushing now in the research community, and it's essential to continue this kind of research. But it's essential also to be aware about the way people will be manipulated by this kind of system. I will explain with 3 examples. First is the continuous learning system, as I explained before. So there is a hole in the racket in the current rules proposed by the European Union about this kind of system. What we do with that? How we can control the fact that a system is able to continuously modify the data and the knowledge, the model, the build. The second thing is the affective computed system. Affective computing is exactly the topic of my research too, to try to detect emotion from the behavior of people, from voice, face, and a lot of different cues. This is currently used for human resources, and there is a lot of conscience to have about the risk of this system. And the other things is how we want to build the system for the future, because now we can see a real problem between the frontier between human and machine, between the live things and objects. And this is crucial to understand more what we want to do, what we want to push in the society, because it will be very dangerous for people to be in front of this machine, like imitate exactly what we are, or supposed to be like we are. There is a lot of anthropomorphism about this system, and the people that are not experts surcapacitate the machine. So try to imagine a lot of capacities of the machine that the machine has not. The machine has no emotion, no conscience, and also no intention. But it's not clear, even in the research talk of a lot of colleagues from many countries, and the people we are very known about deep learning and so on. There is some metaphor which is very dangerous for the common people, because you can be abused by the term and think that the machine will be very intelligent in very few years. The other things, and I will also applaud Jan for the comment about the difference, gender difference. And we have also to take care of that, because there's a lot of unfair topics and we need a lot of diversity. But I usually repeat this sentence, the following sentence: 80%, more than 80% of coders are men. And more than 80% of objects like chatbots or social robots are feminized, like with face, named Alexa, Sophia, and a lot of other names, voice or body. And these systems are slave or agents, assistant, no more than that. And it's a strange idea to represent women in this machine. So we need to use something like random for trying to, but it's a meta consequence of what we are doing in the world, and the fact that there's not enough women in this area of artificial intelligence.
Thank you so much. And we're just about at 2 o'clock, so 2 o'clock Eastern time. So very quickly to summarize some key takeaways, at least for me, some key important aspects of what the democratic governance of AI could look like. Inclusion, diversity, really including especially those that are the most affected. Literacy, not only digital literacy, but also civic literacy being a key factor to ensure democratic governance. Flexibility of policy processes to make sure that we can actually see what's coming and not just be reactive. Accountability, so ensuring that those processes actually create accountability mechanisms in case principles or things change and decisions made are not the right ones. And finally, one that has not been mentioned, but that I would add is really connectivity, ensuring that actually we bridge digital divides internationally towards a more inclusive space, and ensuring that everybody can actually benefit from artificial intelligence technology. So thank you very much to our three panelists today for the great remarks and thought-provoking interventions. I think you've left us with a lot to think about, a lot of optimism really for some of these international processes as well, in terms of the work that is ongoing at the global level, as well as at the regional or not regional, depending on your perspective, with the Council of Europe and with the Global Partnership on AI's great work, obviously. And with that, I will return it to Kyle to close up today's session. Kyle, I'm not sure if you're on.
Yes, I'm here. I just want to be very short. Philippe André, you did an amazing job moderating this. Sasha, Laurence, and Jan, thank you so much for joining us. We really learned so much from your perspectives, and I apologize that we had 3 people in Europe joining us. It's nighttime for you, but thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us. And just tell everyone watching, this is the end of day 3. We have one more session tomorrow with filmmakers and people from Witness to talk about how AI is used to protect human rights activists in Chechnya. So with that to do, I want to thank you for joining us, and please join us again tomorrow.